Welcome to Sinister Serials, where shadows whisper and every tale chills to the... On Weird Wednesday, cosmic horrors from beyond the stars will haunt your dreams. This Weird Wednesday, journey with us to the sands of Egypt in the Shifting Sands of Zaraleth. An expedition led by Dr. Harris seeks ancient truths but finds sinister mysteries instead. As supernatural threats and betrayals unravel, the team faces their darkest fears. Will they escape Zaraleth's grasp, or will history ominously repeat itself?
In the darkened chamber, the air hung heavy with the weight of secrets and betrayal, as if the very walls had absorbed the whispers of unspeakable truths, eldritch secrets that would shatter the fragile veil of reality and plunge those who glimpsed their blasphemous nature into an abyss of irredeemable madness. Captain Samuel Fitzgerald stood rigid, his weathered features cast in stark relief by the guttering torchlight, a feeble bastion of illumination against the encroaching shadows that seemed to writhe and undulate with a malevolent sentience, as though the very fabric of reality was being distorted by forces beyond mortal comprehension. Beside him, Miss Eleanor Sinclair's hazel eyes were wide with a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror, the remnants of their shared nightmare still clinging to her mind like a shroud woven from the gossamer strands of realms beyond human perception, where nameless horrors slithered and vast, uncaring entities regarded the plight of humanity with cold, meaningless amusement. Fitzgerald's gaze swept the ancient stone walls, his eyes searching for any sign of the man they had once trusted as a colleague and friend, a frail illusion of camaraderie shattered by the revelations of the cosmic truth. But Dr. William Chang's absence was a tangible presence, a yawning void that seemed to swallow the meager.
We need to find him,
Fitzgerald said, his voice low and urgent, tinged with a dread that hinted at the unfathomable revelations that awaited them, horrors that would make a mockery of their pitiful, transient existence and leave their minds shattered husks adrift in the howling void of infinity.
If what we saw in the dream is true.
He let the words trail off, unwilling to give voice to the terrible suspicion that had taken root in his mind like a malignant growth, threatening to unravel the fragile threads of his sanity like the rotting warp and weft of a bloated corpse. Sinclair nodded, her slender fingers tightening around the worn leather of her journal, a feeble talisman against the encroaching madness, a desperate attempt to record their fleeting experiences before they were engulfed by the churning maelstrom of a cold and pitiless universe. The dream had been a horrifying glimpse into a twisted reality that neither of them had been prepared to face, a realm where the very laws of existence bent and warped beneath the weight of cosmic truths that the feeble human mind could barely struggle to comprehend before being plunged into the lightless depths of insanity. As they moved deeper into the chamber, the evidence of Chang's betrayal began to reveal itself like a putrescent flower blooming in the fetid depths of some nameless abyss. Scattered among the ancient artifacts and tomes lay idols of strange and cyclopean design, their contorted forms pulsing with a Stygian energy that seemed to thrum in time with the shuddering beat of reality itself, as though the very fabric of the cosmos was straining against the limits of its gossamer confines, threatening to come undone at any moment and spill forth the squirming hordes of eldritch abominations that gibbered and writhed in the spaces between the stars. Cryptic texts, scrawled in a language that defied mortal comprehension, its non-Euclidean symbols and eldritch glyphs seeming to writhe and pulse with a nauseating, Stygian bioluminescence, hinted at dark rituals and unspeakable pacts with entities whose very existence would shatter the fragile boundaries of the human mind, rending asunder the gossamer veil of sanity and thrusting those foolish enough to gaze upon their visage into an endless abyss of gibbering madness. Fitzgerald reached out with trembling fingers, his calloused hand hovering over one of the idols, a twisted mass of oily stone that seemed to throb with a sickening, pulsating light, as though some nameless, writhing horror was trapped within its blasphemous form, straining to break free and rend the flimsy skein of reality asunder. The idol's surface was clammy and unclean to the touch, as though coated in the noisome slime of some abyssal sea that had never known the warmth of the sun. Fitzgerald snatched his hand back with a convulsive shudder.
What have you done, Chang?
He whispered, his voice rough with anger and disbelief, tinged with the cold, creeping dread of one who has glimpsed the true face of the cosmos and found it to be an uncaring, idiot god whose insane piping held sway over the calamitous cacophony of a universe gone mad. Sinclair moved to his side, her eyes scanning the artifacts with a scholar's keen gaze. Yet even her vast knowledge faltered in the face of the squirming, cyclopean horrors that seemed to leap and writhe before her eyes, as though the eldritch truths they represented were too terrible for the human mind to grasp without shattering like a crystal goblet dropped into the yawning abyss of infinity.
These symbols,
She murmured, her voice trembling with a nameless dread that coiled around her heart like a serpentine horror from beyond the stars.
I've seen them before, in the moldering pages of forbidden tomes that spoke of the unspeakable horrors that lurk in the churning void between worlds, of the insignificance of humanity in the face of the vast, uncaring cosmos.
Fitzgerald's jaw clenched, the memory of those blasphemous texts flooding back to him like a tidal wave of cosmic revelation, threatening to drown him in the black depths of a universe gone mad. The warnings of a great and terrible power that slumbered beneath the shifting sands of the desert, an entity whose very existence was a blight upon the cosmos, a twisted mockery of all that humanity held dear, a force that would scour the world clean of life and leave nothing but the howling void in its wake.
Zaraleth.
He said, the name tasting like bile on his tongue, a vile epithet that seemed to echo with the maddening piping of a trillion nameless horrors that danced and gibbered in the darkness between the stars. Sinclair's face paled, her skin taking on the waxy pallor of a corpse left to rot in the fetid depths of some forgotten tomb. The implications of Fitzgerald's words crashed down upon her like a tidal wave of existential dread and cosmic despair, threatening to drown her in an abyssal sea of hopelessness and madness, a mere speck of dust adrift in the merciless currents of a universe that cared nothing for the feeble struggles of mankind. Suddenly, a sound echoed through the chamber, a faint rustling that seemed to come from every direction at once, as though the very air was alive with the squirming, chittering presence of something ancient and unspeakably alien. Fitzgerald's hand flew to the hilt of his saber, the rasp of steel against leather shattering the cloying silence like the discordant shriek of 1,000 mad pipers playing a frenzied hymn to the uncaring gods that ruled the cosmos. From the shadows, a figure emerged, clad in the tattered remnants of an expedition uniform, its fabric hanging in leprous rags from a hunched and twisted frame that seemed to defy the very laws of nature. Dr. William Chang's face was a grotesque mask of eldritch calm, his once human features warped and distorted by the squirming, writhing influence of the name.
My foolish friends.
He chuckled, his voice a grating, sibilant hiss that seemed to echo from the depths of some lightless abyss. A mocking parody of human speech that set their teeth on edge and sent icy tendrils of fear coiling around their hearts.
I see you have stumbled upon my great work, a paltry glimpse into the vast and terrible truth that awaits us all, the cold and squirming reality that lies hidden behind the fragile veil of this pitiful existence.
Fitzgerald's grip tightened on the hilt of his saber, the cold steel of the blade a feeble comfort against the rising tide of cosmic dread that threatened to engulf him. A paltry defense against the mind-shattering revelations that poured from Chang's twisted lips like a vile ichor. Sinclair stepped forward, her hand trembling like a leaf in a chill autumn wind, her eyes wide with a desperate, pleading incomprehension, as though by understanding Chang's words she could somehow hold back the encroaching tide of madness that threatened to sweep them all away.
Why, Dr. Chang?
She whispered, her voice a thready, broken thing, a feeble mewling against the roaring silence of the cosmos.
Why would you betray us? Betray everything we've worked for? What could possibly be worth unleashing such horrors upon the world?
Chang's laughter was a cruel, bubbling thing, a sound that seemed to rise from the depths of some putrid, stagnant sea where nameless abominations swam and ancient horrors slithered in the lightless abyss.
Betray you?
He sneered, his twisted features contorting into a mocking rictus of contempt.
Oh, you poor, misguided fools, so blind in your ignorance, so pitiful in your desperate need to cling to the tattered veil of your insignificant reality. I have not betrayed you. I have ascended beyond the petty boundaries of mortality and glimpsed the true nature of the cosmos, the squirming, eternal truth that lies at the heart of all existence.
He gestured to the grotesque artifacts and blasphemous texts that littered the chamber, his hand a claw-like thing that seemed to twist and writhe in the flickering light, as though the very bones within were not wholly of this world.
Zaraleth is not some mere legend, you pathetic, mewling apes.
He hissed, his voice rising to a shrill, feverish pitch.
Zaraleth is the key to the very fabric of reality itself, a wellspring of power and knowledge that has lain dormant for ages beyond counting, waiting for one with the courage to seize it, to wield it, to tear aside the rotting skein of lies that you fools call sanity, and gaze upon the true face of the universe.
Fitzgerald shook his head in disbelief, his mind reeling from the sheer, incomprehensible scope of Chang's madness, a madness that seemed to radiate from him like a palpable, writhing miasma.
You're insane.
He gasped, his voice a hoarse, ragged whisper.
You're utterly, irredeemably insane. The things you speak of, they cannot be. They must not be. The human mind was never meant to bear such knowledge, such terrible, squirming truths.
Chang's laughter rose to a manic crescendo, a sound like the shrieking of a billion nameless horrors that danced and capered in the fetid depths of some cosmic abyss.
Insane?
He cackled, his eyes wild with a feverish, unholy glee.
Oh, you poor, deluded fool, you have no conception of true madness, of the glorious, terrible freedom that comes from embracing the unfettered truth of the cosmos. Your pitiable sanity is nothing more than a fragile construct, a gossamer veil that barely masks the churning, seething madness that lurks at the heart of all existence, the rising, eternal chaos that will one day rise up and devour your pitiful, insignificant world.
Sinclair's hand flew to her mouth, her face drained of all color, a ghostly specter in the guttering torchlight. The gibbering madness that poured from Chang's mouth was a vile, poisonous thing. A corrosive acid that ate away at the very foundations of her being, dissolving the fragile threads of sanity that bound her mind together. Even to hear such blasphemous truths was to feel the cold, oily touch of madness upon her soul, a creeping, insidious taint that could never be fully cleansed. The chamber shuddered and heaved like the final, convulsive breath of a dying leviathan, the ground beneath their feet rippling and distending as though reality itself was being rent asunder by the clawed grasp of forces beyond mortal comprehension, vast, unknowable entities from dimensions of seething, primal chaos, whose very existence made a mocking jest of humanity's tenuous grasp on the fragile veil of sanity. From the Stygian depths of eldritch shadow, a blasphemous form emerged, a chaotic, writhing mass of undulating tentacles and glaring, unblinking eyes, a nightmarish amalgamation of legend and madness that defied the feeble boundaries of human comprehension. Its contorted, cyclopean body pulsed with an unearthly bioluminescence, its squamous hide glistening with vile ichor that reeked of the charnel pits of 1,000 nameless hells. Lambent orbs of malevolent crimson burned in the twisted mass of its visage, searing into their souls with the intensity of 1,000 dying suns, the pitiless gaze of an entity that had witnessed the birth and death of galaxies beyond count, and for whom humanity's greatest achievements and most harrowing atrocities were as insignificant as the frantic scurrying of ants beneath the uncaring stars. Fitzgerald's saber was a useless toy in his hand, a pitiful fragment of mortal steel against the overwhelming might of the cosmic horror that loomed before them, its very presence a suffocating weight upon their souls, crushing the breath from their lungs and the sanity from their minds. He lunged forward in a desperate, futile gesture, the gleaming arc of his blade cutting through the churning shadows like a falling star doomed to be swallowed by the endless depths of the abyss. But the entity moved with a speed and grace that defied mortal comprehension, its writhing tentacles lashing out with a serpentine precision to seize the captain's arm and hurl him across the chamber like a rag doll, his body shattering against the unyielding stone with a sickening crunch of splintering bone and pulverized flesh. Sinclair screamed, a raw, primal sound that tore itself from her throat like the agonized wailing of a lost soul, a feeble, mewling cry of despair against the uncaring indifference of a cold and pitiless universe. She clutched her journal to her breast like a talisman, her white-knuckled fingers digging into the worn leather as though it were a lifeline, a fragile anchor in the seething madness that threatened to consume her utterly. The creature's laughter was a bone-chilling sound, a grating, discordant cacophony that reverberated through the chamber like the mocking mirth of 1,000 malevolent gods. It turned its baleful gaze upon Sinclair, its writhing tentacles reaching out to caress her face with a grotesque parody of tenderness, leaving trails of stinging, viscous slime upon her skin.
Foolish, insignificant creature.
It hissed, its voice a sibilant whisper that seemed to echo from the very depths of her mind, an insidious, invasive presence that coiled around her thoughts like a serpent.
You dare to stand against the inexorable tide of destiny, to defy the will of the cosmos itself? Your pathetic struggles are as meaningless as the mewling of an infant in the face of the infinite void, a flickering spark doomed to be swallowed by the eternal darkness.
Sinclair's mind reeled, her sanity crumbling like a sand castle before the relentless onslaught of the entity's words, each syllable a hammer blow that shattered another piece of her fragile psyche, another shard of her rapidly dwindling humanity. The revelations that poured from its squirming maw were a vile, corrosive poison that ate away at the very foundations of her being, dissolving the gossamer threads of reason and logic that bound her to the comforting illusion of a sane and ordered universe. She saw the truth then, a terrible, squirming reality that lurked behind the tattered veil of mortal perception, a churning, seething abyss of madness and horror that would one day rise up to consume all of creation. A cosmic cancer that would devour the very stars themselves and leave nothing but the howling, eternal void in its wake. Dr. Chang's face swam into view, a twisted, leering mask of triumphant madness. His eyes twin pits of ebon insanity that seemed to swallow the feeble light of the guttering torches.
Do you see now, Miss Sinclair?
He cackled, his voice a shrill, mocking parody of reason.
Do you understand the glorious, terrible truth of the cosmos? The writhing, eternal chaos that will one day rise up to claim us all.
Sinclair shook her head in mute horror, her mind reeling from the sheer, incomprehensible scope of the revelations that crashed down upon her like a tidal wave of existential dread, threatening to drown her utterly in the yawning abyss of cosmic madness. She wanted to scream, to weep, to claw out her own eyes and rip the tainted knowledge from her mind. Anything to escape the squirming, writhing truth that coiled within her skull like a nest of venomous serpents. But it was too late. The taint of cosmic revelation had burrowed deep into her soul, a vile, cancerous growth that could never be excised, a festering wound that would fester and rot until it consumed her utterly, a mere speck of insignificant dust adrift in the howling winds of infinity. In that moment, she understood the true nature of the cosmos, the terrible, squirming reality that lurked behind the fragile veil of mortal sanity. She saw the vast, uncaring emptiness that yawned between the stars, the seething, primal chaos that roiled in the depths of the abyss, the mocking laughter of the gods who danced and capered in the ruins of 1,000 shattered worlds. And she knew, with a horrifying certainty that shattered the last vestiges of her crumbling sanity, that humanity was nothing more than a fleeting aberration, a cosmic joke scrawled in the margins of an uncaring universe, a flickering spark doomed to be swallowed by the eternal darkness that lurked at the edges of creation. The chamber wavered and rippled as Chang strode toward the ancient altar, his twisted form silhouetted against the writhing shadows that seemed to cling to him like a cloak. He reached out with a trembling hand to brush the surface of the stone, his long, pale fingers caressing the eldritch symbols that danced and gibbered across its rough-hewn surface.
At last,
he whispered, his voice soft and reverent, tinged with an unholy ecstasy.
At long last, the truth will be revealed. The veil will be parted, and the eternal madness that lurks beyond will devour this pitiful, insignificant world and all who dwell within it.
His words echoed through the chamber like a dark and ancient prophecy, a promise of horror and desolation that hung in the air like the cloying stench of an open grave. The very stones seemed to tremble with a cold and squirming unease, as though the temple itself was aware of the blasphemous rite that was about to unfold within its cyclopean walls. The creature reared up behind Chang, its massive, writhing form blotting out the flickering light of the torches as it loomed over the altar, a grotesque parody of an ancient idol, a god of madness and chaos given blasphemous flesh. Its chittering laughter filled the chamber, a sound like the shrieking of 1 billion damned souls, a mocking, triumphant paean to the impending doom of all that was sane and good in the world. Sinclair crouched in the corner, her arms wrapped around her knees, her eyes wide and staring, glazed with the sheen of utter madness. She rocked back and forth in a feeble, mewling rhythm, her mouth moving in silent, gibbering prayer to gods that had long since abandoned the pitiful creatures that crawled and suffered in the darkness of their shadow. Somewhere beyond the stone walls of the temple, the world slept on, blissfully unaware of the squirming, writhing horror that was about to be unleashed upon it, blind to the vast, uncaring void that lurked beyond the tattered veil of its fragile reality. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient, inscrutable dance, as cold and pitiless as the eyes of the gods who looked down upon the insignificant drama unfolding below with a cruel and knowing amusement. Chang's chanting rose to a feverish crescendo, his voice cracking and breaking with the strain of the eldritch syllables that spilled from his lips in a torrent of blasphemous madness. The air shimmered and rippled, as though the very fabric of reality was being torn asunder by the corrosive touch of his words, as though the veil between the worlds was being ripped aside to reveal the churning, seething abyss that lurked beyond. The creature's laughter rose to a deafening roar, its writhing tentacles lashing out to grasp the altar, its massive, pulsing form towering over Chang like a grotesque mockery of a priest at a blasphemous mass. The stone cracked and shattered beneath its grasp, the ancient symbols flaring to sickly life as a wave of pure, unadulterated madness washed over the chamber, a psychic tsunami that shattered the minds of all who stood within its radius like fragile glass figurines. Sinclair screamed, a raw, animal sound that tore itself from her throat like the agonized wailing of a lost soul, a feeble, pitiful mewling against the inexorable tide of cosmic horror that crashed down upon her like a tidal wave of pure, squirming insanity. She felt the last vestiges of her sanity crumble like a sand castle before the relentless onslaught, her mind shattering into a million jagged shards, each one a glittering fragment of madness that danced and capered in the howling vortex of her consciousness. Fitzgerald's broken body twitched and spasmed on the chamber floor, his eyes staring sightlessly at the writhing shadows that danced across the walls, his mouth frozen in a rictus grin of sheer, mind-shattering horror. His soul had been torn from his body like a moth caught in the flames, consumed utterly by the squirming, eternal madness that lurked beyond the fragile veil of human sanity. Chang's laughter rose to a manic crescendo, his voice a shrill, discordant shriek that echoed through the chamber like the mocking mirth of 1,000 malevolent gods. He threw his head back, his arms outstretched in a grotesque parody of religious ecstasy, his face a twisted mask of unholy rapture as he gazed upon the writhing, chaotic form of the creature that loomed above him. And then the world shattered, reality itself splintering like a pane of brittle glass as the veil was finally torn asunder, as the vast, squirming madness that lurked beyond finally surged forth to claim its rightful place in the cosmos. The temple walls cracked and crumbled, the very stones screaming in agony as they were twisted and warped into blasphemous new configurations, the cyclopean architecture of the ancients giving way to the writhing, non-Euclidean geometry of pure, unbridled chaos. The sky split open like a festering wound, the stars swallowed by the seething, primal darkness that boiled up from the depths of the abyss, a churning vortex of eldritch energy that twisted and distorted the very fabric of reality itself. The air was filled with the deafening roar of a billion screaming souls, the agonized wailing of a universe torn asunder by the corrupting touch of the cosmic horror that had been unleashed upon it. Sinclair huddled in the corner, her mind shattered beyond all hope of repair, her eyes wide and staring into the seething madness that swirled around her, a feeble, mewling thing lost in the howling vortex of the abyss. She clutched her journal to her chest, the worn leather cover slick with the icy sweat of pure, unadulterated terror, the pages within filled with the gibbering, incoherent scratchings of a mind pushed far beyond the limits of human sanity. And through it all, the creature loomed, a writhing, cyclopean abomination that defied all laws of nature and reason, a squirming, eternal blasphemy that danced and capered in the ruins of a shattered world, its mocking laughter echoing across the churning void like the cruel mirth of a billion malevolent gods. Dr. Chang stood at the center of the maelstrom, his arms raised in unholy supplication, his face a twisted mask of ecstatic rapture as he gazed upon the fruition of his labors, the ultimate triumph of the cosmic madness he had embraced. His laughter mingled with the creature's own, a discordant, unholy symphony that set the very stones to trembling, that sent icy tendrils of pure, squirming horror coiling through the shattered remnants of Sinclair's mind. The world beyond the temple had been consumed, devoured utterly by the seething, primal chaos that had surged forth from the depths of the abyss, a churning vortex of madness and despair that would never be sated, that would never rest until all of creation had been swallowed up in its squirming, eternal embrace. And in the midst of it all, a single, feeble thought flickered through the shattered remnants of Eleanor Sinclair's mind, a final, desperate plea to a cosmos that had proven itself deaf to the suffering of its insignificant creations.
Please, let it end. Let it all end.
But there would be no end, no release from the squirming, eternal madness that had claimed her, no escape from the vast, uncaring void that had swallowed her whole. She was lost, adrift in the seething tides of chaos, a mere speck of insignificant dust borne upon the howling winds of a universe gone mad. And so she laughed, a shrill, manic sound that bubbled up from the depths of her shattered psyche like the poisoned mirth of a billion gibbering demons, a final, hopeless surrender to the all-consuming madness that had claimed her mind and soul.
Thank you for joining us on another spine-chilling journey, where nightmares come to life and horror knows no bounds. If you enjoyed this tale of terror, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're brave enough, step through the door and subscribe to Sinister Serials, where every day brings a new flavor of fear, from macabre Mondays to thriller Thursdays. And don't forget to check out our other terrifying tales, waiting to be discovered in our library of horror. Until next time, keep the lights on if you dare.